Hello. I assume my stream. I hope my stream started. Okay, it has. Hello. I assume my stream. I hope my stream. I can hear myself. That's bad. Okay. Okay. Alrighty. Alright. Well, because I don't have time to waste, let's get frickin' started. Contribution of the professions to the procedures of the houses. This is a long chapter. Sorry, this is a long section, not a. It's not a chapter. It is a long section, and so that's why. So that's why we're freaking gonna be doing this. That's why we're gonna be doing this. So yeah. We do not have to decide on our own, as one did under the old speculative metaphysics, about the furnishing of the world. We have only to define the equipment, instruments, skills, and knowledge that will allow experimental metaphysics to start up again, in order to decide collectively on its habitat, its oikos, its familiar dwelling. To simplify our itinerary in this section, we're going to start with the old corporations the old constitution mobilized, and discover how they can contribute to the entire set of functions of public life. That is, to take the 4 functions identified in Chapter 3, task number 1, perplexity, task number 2, consultation, task number 3, hierarchy, and task number 4, institution, to which we shall add 2 skills: the maintenance of the separation or shuttle between the power to take into account and the power to put in order, task number 5, and lastly, what could be called the scenarization of the collective in a unified whole. And task number 6. And so we will go to 270 to see. You're on 15. We are not on 270. We are way past that. We're on 273. I have restricted myself to the trades that modernism has exploited most. This is why, despite its importance, law is not mentioned. Indeed, law always had the good manners to accept its relativism and its constructivism without making a big fuss. It is capable of recognizing that others have a legal system that is simply different. It agrees to bring together reality and fiction in a positive way. It is less implicated, so to speak, in the question of nature than capital S science, politics, or morality. The same thing holds true for art, which we have not considered either, in spite of its importance in the formation of the task of the collective, and for the same reason. No one has ever said, even in the Western tradition, the relation between art and nature was indisputable. I have thus retained only the traits that are the most difficult to anthropologize, those which have real trouble with constructed entities. And then 16, which is talking about reference to the scenarization. In Chapter 5, we shall add a 7th function to which all the professions will have to contribute, and that will have to do with following up on the learning curve of the collective, namely the age-old art of governing. And I think we are on 137. Yes. We shall benefit from the fact that all the professions contribute to developing the same job with different skills. Instead of finding themselves, as they did under the old regime, charged with a sector carved off artificially within reality. Science concerning itself with nature, politics with the social world, morality with foundations. Yes. Is this good? Or is this too loud? Okay. How about this? Is this good? Alright. We shall benefit from the fact that all the professions contribute to developing the same job with different skills, instead of them finding themselves, as they did under the old regime, charged with a sector carved off artificially within reality, science concerning itself with nature, politics with the social world, morality with foundations, economics with infrastructure, administration with the state. Like fairies hovering over the four cradles of the new collective, each corporation is there to offer its own particular gifts. And so I assume in this we're going to be going over the four fairies, basically. The contribution of scientists. What can we expect of the sciences once they have been delivered from science? That they limit themselves to simple facts, phenomena, data, that they stay within the strict boundaries of reason, abandoning the other functions of the corporation of morality and politics? Of course not. On the contrary, they must share in all functions. And then back to 273. The sciences have always participated in all the tasks of the collective. Moreover, as the new history of the sciences clearly shows, but this time they do so without hypocrisy and according to due process. See among others the fine examples of Galileo, Bengalio 1983, Pasteur, Guesson 1995, and Lord Kelvin, Smith and Wise 1989. And then let us take one by one all the tasks to which the sciences have to contribute. To make it easier, we shall follow the numbering given above and repeated in figure 4.1. This is, I assume this is figure 4. Yes, this is figure 4.1. We'll check that out in a second. This somewhat pedantic way of proceeding will allow us to gradually get rid of the bad habits that led us to try to make the various professions work separately, instead of coordinating their aptitudes for the construction of a single public edifice. Next, we shall see how each of the other forms of skills shares in the same functions with its own specific capabilities. In the following section, I shall reverse the direction of the presentation and start with the procedures of the collective in order to define both its dynamics and the new corporations that would have to be included in it. The sciences will give perplexity, the formidable asset of instruments and laboratories, which will allow it to detect scarcely visible phenomena very early. Task number 1. Let us not forget that it is a matter of bringing into the collective associations of humans and non-humans that are endowed with speech only by means of prostheses of an immense complexity. See Chapter 2. Sorry about that. I had a cough. I had a cough, and then I had a sneeze. Then I had a freaking sneeze. Now, who is better able than the scientists to make the world speak, write, hold forth? Their work consists precisely in inventing through the intermediary of instruments and the artifice of the laboratory the displacement of point of view that is so indispensable to public life. Each of the skills developed by profession, we're going to go over 4.1. Each of the skills developed by profession, here that of the sciences, contributes equally to the 6 functions of the collective. Skill, for example, perplexity, consultation, institution, hierarchization, separation of powers, and the scenarization of the totality. How can one take new beings into account if one cannot radically change the positions of one's gaze? Science may claim to have established residence nowhere, but that is not where the sciences in the plural live. They do much better than offer a detached point of view, as if they could abstract themselves and attain a view from nowhere. On the contrary, they make it possible to shift viewpoints constantly by means of experiments, instruments, models, and theories. And if they succeed in considering the world from the vantage point of Sirius, it is through the intermediary of telescopes, interstellar soundings, spectrographic rays, and the theories of physics. Sirius is, I assume that's how you pronounce it, Sirius? Sirius. Is the personification of the scorching or glowing dog scar, the brightest star in the night, which is linked to the oppressive heat of the dog days of summer. The Greek believes the star intensified the sun's heat, causing droughts and fevers. Okay, so I assume because it's the brightest star that it's also the reason why scientists want to do this is because it's like probably also considered one of the highest. That might be a bit wrong, but that's what I'm going to go with. Such is the particular. Sorry, I was reading a little bit more. Such is their particular form of relativism, that is, relationism. So the sciences are going to put into the common basket their skills, their ability to provide instruments and equipment, their capacity to record and listen to the swarming of different imperceptible propositions that demand to be taken into account. They will also contribute to the work of consultation. Number 2, through competency that has allowed them to get ahead of all the other callings, that of controversy and experimental testing. As we saw in Chapter 2, speech impedimenta are what count for us in civil life. In other words, doubt about the quality of the representation. Now the sciences have invented the principle according to which each candidate for existence finds itself attached to a group of ad hoc contradictors and to a set of reliable witnesses, chosen for the occasion, each of which will try to find the other wanting by making the same entity speak differently in the course of the experiment, thanks to the other trials. Through the search for an experimental protocol, the disciplines very quickly investigate for every candidate for existence those amongst its colleagues that can judge it best, which trials can best make them change their minds. I'm actually gonna highlight this. I think purple is what I was decided on. And then for this, I was going to do that. And then back to 270. We're on 18. The modern beginnings of this often chaotic history can be found in Japan 1994 in the Cup 1996. 165? 164. No. What page are we on? Oh my god. I'm lost. I'm lost. I'm lost. I'm scared. Mom, I'm scared. Mom, I'm scared. Okay, here we go. 155. It wasn't 175, it was 155. No, this isn't right either. Wait, hold on, this isn't right either, actually. Was it 145? Okay. Okay, no, it's even further back. I think it might actually be like 130. Okay. It's this, it's 139. How can we imagine, even for a second, depriving ourselves of the sciences to put in order of importance the heterogeneous entities in a homogeneous hierarchy? Number 3. A task that moralists use to claim as theirs, forbidding scientists who are limited to the facts alone to touch it with the tip of a test tube. But it is from the sciences, by contrast, that we expect a decisive skill once again, that of imagining the possibilities while offering to public life heterogeneous innovations and compromises. Let us remember that this function cannot be assured that the list of the entities that have to be ordered is limited once and for all, or if it is made up of essences with fixed boundaries. I actually think for Latour, that's the deciding thing. When Latour, there's something very interesting about Latour's idea of essences. Essences are, despite what they sound like, they aren't actually fixed in the same way. They aren't actually fixed in the same exact way. They are a bit more complicated than that. Essences, for instance, can be changed. What the essence of something is can change. For Latour, the essences are like earlier frogs were the example. It was thought of that these frogs, well, I just like earlier there was this like highway, and I guess ecologists were concerned because this particular frog species liked to return to the pond that they grew up in. And so they ended up kind of digging out these tunnels for these frogs to kind of go through under the highway. And it turns out the frogs didn't necessarily go through those tunnels and necessarily return to the same pond. They didn't do that, but it was like it was just thought they did that, but then it seems like I guess this isn't this isn't right anymore. I guess this isn't right, and that was kind of the thing. So essences are very interesting for the tour. Thus, we need scientists with bold imaginations in order to be able to zoom in on an order of preference going from large to small that unblocks the situation by shifting the weight of the necessary compromises to other beings and other properties. For instance, if pig organs that have been humanized to avoid rejection can be grafted onto humans, that grave ethical question of brain death suddenly becomes less important. And then back to 173. Sorry, back to 273. One can think of the difference it makes to the ethical debate if stem cells are substituted for embryos for the therapeutic use of totipotent cells. Totipotent. What is that? Totipotent. The most potent type of cell capable of self-renewal, development into all cells of a type. Okay. It's kind of what it sounds like. Another example, one that allowed the Pasteurians to introduce into the stalemated situation of the class struggle between rich and poor a different struggle, the one between contagious rich and poor and vaccinated rich and poor. Health measures taken against microbes would have been unthinkable without the slight displacement of the struggle. Another canonical example is found in the way the French atomic scientists translated the military art into nuclear physics. See Vet 1979. A marvelous case of compromise and innovations with the basic law of physics, in this case relativity theory, is provided by Mackenzie in 1990. These arrangements and substitutions are innumerable, and they define the sciences, often aligned with technological breakthroughs where task number 3 is concerned. And then I think we are still on 139. Let's see. Yes. With one minuscule modification in the structure of a material, a technical breakthrough, an innovative piece of legislation, a new statistical treatment, a tiny variation in temperature or pressure, what was impossible becomes possible. What was blocked is unblocked. The sins of pride and arrogance that scientists commit in the name of science become civic virtues when they participate with their very imagination in the search for wisdom by offering to recombine the habits of the propositions submitted to collective examination. And then back to 273 for 20. Science studies have pursued this point in a wide variety of ways. The Law 1986, Beaker and Law 1992, and Beaker 1995 for the approach taken by researchers at the École des Mines, see especially Acric and Latour and Le Monet, 1994. 139. Still. Who would want to deprive the function of institution, number 4, of researchers' skills? If we have criticized science for its confusion between perplexity and the certainty of instituted facts, it is only because science claims it can leap directly from one to the other without rule-governed procedures. There is no longer anything illegitimate in the fact of using the competencies of scientists not only to obtain consensus, but also to shelter its right away in forms of life, instruments, paradigms, teachings, bodily skills, black boxes. Okay, sorry. I was having trouble. My brain is being a little bit slow. What he's saying is, before, when we talk about science, we would just be like, oh well, science just gets there. It just discovers this stuff. There's like nothing else that happens to it. You just go from like this like uncertainty to this like absolute certainty. You just like know. And what the sciences are doing is implementing the like Latour's talked about, the like this process to get to it. And so no longer is there anything illegitimate in saying that we can get to perplexity to certainty. There's nothing illegitimate anymore because we get there by uh, by these procedures, by these rule governed procedures. There's like a process here. It's not just like you don't just jump from A to B. Here again, once the state of law has been restored, all the defects of scientists become strong points. Yes, scientists know how to make irreversible what has long been the object of a controversy and that has just become the object of agreement. Moreover, a collective that is not able to produce a definitive, durable closure of the established positions would be incapable of surviving. This attachment to paradigms, all those sins of obstinacy and closed-mindedness, the tendency with which scientists are so often reproached to wear blinders, now become important qualities, indispensable to public life. For it is through that the collective gains stability. Thanks to the skills of scientists, habits become essences, and causalities and responsibilities alike are durably assigned. We're gonna highlight that as well. And we're gonna go to 273.21. We can see the reversal with respect to the earliest studies undertaken in the sociology of sciences. These explain the closing off of uncertainties by the stabilizing effect of ideologies, the weight of sociological factors or institutions in the ordinary sense. See Barnes and Chopin, 1979. Here, on the contrary, the sciences themselves are participating in the stabilization of the collective. Conversely, we see that scientism errs only because it confuses a particular skill, contribution to task number 4, with the overall scientific endeavor. It is no longer at all difficult to say that the scientists participate, and fortunately so, in the production of the indisputable. Let us reassert the Socrates, the law of universal gravity, is now quite solidly established, even though it no longer has in 1, 2, and 3 the same capacity to shut people up. If for anyone who doesn't know about this, Sokol didn't like that Latour talked about Einstein. That Sokol didn't like that Latour uses Einstein's theory of relativity as like kind of like the example of everything. Like for Latour, Einstein's relativity is massively important because it is his own relativity. It is the relativity he is talking about. The relativity, which is relationism, as he says, is the thing. Um, but yeah, but yeah, I probably should have added it in the server, but I didn't want to because it's so late. When I do it earlier, when I do it at like 9, the next stream I do, when I'm kind of like a bit, because I am starting to get a bit tired, but I'm like fine for now. Once I do that, I'll add everyone like I said I would, and I also need to start working on my other essays. We argue that researchers must not have a great deal to say about the separation of the two new powers. Number 5. Since they have gotten so used to the conveniences of science that they have only infringed on the separation by passing without warning and taking into account the putting in order. This is to forget that researchers devote much of their time to defending their autonomy. Now, this combat does not simply attest to their habitual corporatism, the capacity to ask one's own questions without being intimidated by any good sense, however few people may understand them, and however little importance may be attributed to the stakes, is a form of self-defense that is indispensable to the maintenance of an uncrossable barrier between the requirements of the first house and the wholly contrary ones of the second. One must not forbid oneself to take a new being into account on the pretext that it does not appear on the current list of members of the collective. Um. Oh. Okay. We're gonna highlight. That's actually really good. Um. What he's basically getting at, like the fundamental thing Latour is getting at here is for Latour, the two houses for Latour are I think they are literally taking into account and putting in order. The job of the scientist is mostly to take into account. Um um and they do putting in order. I don't want to say they don't. But these are separate tasks for the scientists. These are different tasks for the scientists. They function differently, and when you are taking into account, which is the first house, as he says, um, you really there's no reason to because it's not currently on the list of things to be put in order. There's no reason that you can't take it into account because it might just be new. It might be a new member of the collective. It might be new. I really need to, if anyone has any good recommendations for drawing tablets, um, please message me uh, because I will I will draw for the stream. I will like draw some of this stuff out because I think it's really good for Latour to do that, to draw stuff out like that, and so I very interested in that. I'll be trying to search for some on my own, but I just haven't had the time because I've had migraines, and so I've kind of been like, and this kind of came to me recently, and I was like, oh, I actually do have the money for it. I looked up how much one costs, and it's like, depending on like which one I get, it's like gonna be less than $100, but so I'm not too worried about it. This demand for autonomy and questioning, mistakenly confused for the moment with an indisputable right to knowledge, recognition, and budget, has for the time being only one weakness, that of being a privilege reserved for scientists. 274. You can recall the famous episode in which Lord Kelvin, a physicist, claimed that the lifespan of the solar system was much more limited than the biologist, inspired by Darwin, needed it to be for the unfolding of evolution. The biologist resisted politely and continued to think in terms of hundreds of millions of years, despite the physicist's interdiction, even though physicists had much more prestige at the time. The phenomenon of evolution insisted, despite the absence of a physical theory capable of reducing it or explaining it. And the biologists were quite right to hold on to their enigma, since with the discovery of radioactivity, the physicists would soon endow the sun with a lifespan that was finally compatible with biological evolution. This is a good example of resistance on the part of a problem to premature solutions. Extend this resistance to everyone, and you have democracy defined as the autonomy of the problems raised. It is when the public at large stubbornly seeks to protect its interrogations, if need be against the acquisition of a rationalism by certain scientific lobbies, that it is the most scientific. This is very interesting. And then I also want a blue. I want to make this blue. I want this bluey. I want this to be bluey. Okay. Because that's very interesting. Am I still 140? Apportioned out to all the members of the collective, humans and non-humans, this demand is going to prove decisive for the good health of the collective. We must not only admire but extend to everyone this capacity to maintain one's own questions, no matter what pressures may be brought to bear by more prestigious disciplines or better established institutions. In particular, this is the only way to benefit from the contribution of primary qualities without authorizing them to drive off the secondary qualities. The right to ask one's own question in one's own terms could be included in the Bill of Rights. This is very interesting. I like that. It's not very interesting, it makes sense. Also, I want to see how long we have. Okay, we're probably just going to go to that. I said I was going to get through like 15 pages, and I got through like 10. But I'm kind of getting a bit out of it. And I want to make sure that I remember most of this stuff, because I have. Like, even though I've stopped, I do remember most of this stuff up to this point. So yeah. What is the contribution of the sciences to the final task, number 6, which consists in offering the entire collective a scenarization, depicting it in the form of a whole, by dividing up its inner and outer limits, by acting as if the search for a common world had found its definitive haven? Here again, once it has been saved by procedures, poison becomes medicine. The minor sins of mad scientists are transmuted into the virtues of the new citizens of the collective. The metaphysics of nature had all possible disadvantages when it was practiced by science. Now, on the contrary, it becomes a key responsibility of the sciences. Nothing is more indispensable than the multiplication of the great narratives through which researchers package the entire collective and human and non-human history in a grandiose generalization from tiny bits of laboratory knowledge. The great scientific narratives of the origin of the world from the Big Bang to the thermal death of the sun, on the evolution of life from the amoeba to Einstein, of universal history from Plato to NATO, the daily breakfast with God about the theory of everything. Each of these crazy frescoes proposes a possible unification, and it hardly matters then that the wildest imaginary scenarios mingle with the tested facts. It hardly matters that people dream of applications impossible to prove, that they exceed all the limits of good sense. It hardly matters even that the most ascetic reductionism claims to reign by virtue of having eliminated most of the world's entities. On the contrary, the fewer the entities there are to take into account, the more convincing the totalization will be. On this great, hastily set up stage, all that matters is the production of the common world, and that has become now licit and is offered to the rest of the collective as a new occasion to unite. Naturalization is no longer a defect either, when nature no longer reigns separately. It becomes a dress rehearsal, an offer of service, one possible scenario, suggesting what the collective could become if it were unified. It is no longer a matter of making the primary qualities the foundation of all the rest, but of making a narrative reduced to its simplest expression, provisional envelope of the collective. I'm going to actually do this. I'm going to do that. We're going to do this one. This brief trajectory, which we shall follow again in the opposite direction in the next section by showing the convergence of the various professions, proves to what extent the sciences play an indispensable role in the 6 functions of the collective, and all the more fruitful role in that they no longer play alone. Once the parenthesis of science has been closed, along with its stream of purity and externality, the sciences restore to the civic life that they should never have pretended to abandon. Finally, rediscover the meaning of the word disinterested. Obviously does not mean that they are cold, detached, uninterested. That, like everyone else, they have to be able to devote themselves to the task of perplexity and consultation without the requirements of the lower house constantly disturbing them by asking them to be reasonable and realistic. This is very interesting. Conversely, when they take on the task of hierarchy and institution, researchers finally rediscover the form of disinterestedness that they never should have lost. The upper house is no longer tyrannizing them. since they can henceforth finally detach themselves from the unhealthy obsession with their specialties that made them so suspect in the eyes of their partners, who were worried to see them put their own interests and those of their own projects above the common. And also, I like this one. When it was being taken seriously, the old Constitution made it necessary to criticize the sciences for the traces of ideology that sustained in them, for the surreptitious crossing of the yellow line between simple facts and values, the crushing of poor humans under the weight of instrumental reason. Scientists had to be constantly punished for their arrogance by being dragged back to the prison of the laboratory, forced not to look higher than their own palate. We have done the inverse. Far from criticizing the scientists, one must, on the contrary, respect the diversity of their skills, allow the variety of their qualities to be developed, their indefinite contributions to the composition of the common world unfold. There is no need either to imagine a meta-science that would be more complex, warmer, more human, more dialectical, and that would allow us to surpass the narrow rationalism of the established sciences. The sciences lack neither purity nor complexity. They were led astray only by the claim to occupy the 6 functions without getting involved with the other callings, which by different means pursue the same goals as the sciences. Let us restore to the sciences the crush of democracy from which they were supposed to have been protected as they grew. I'm gonna highlight this. Highlight. Okay. And because my brain is slowly shutting off because I had 8 hours of work, and I also did book club, and I've also been having migraines. We will end stream. But we got almost 10 pages. We should be able to finish this within a stream or two. And so that's good. And this is broken up into sections. And we might get a little bit further next time. Because next time, it will be Friday probably, even if I have work, I don't work so late. I get off a bit early. And so it's all good. But yeah. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. I love this, and I love my Latour. I love my Latour guy. You'll be doing more Latour. I'll be making more essays. I'm going to start working on more of my essays tomorrow. But yeah, I also need to find a drawing tablet. So if anyone has any suggestions, message me. But otherwise, good night, everyone. Hope you like this. I like this. I'm glad I got to stream again. I haven't streamed in a while. I haven't read in a while because of my migraines, and so I'm happy to do this again. I was really missing this. I've started AIM. I'm really excited for AIM, everyone. We might actually go on an AIM arc. AIM might be, unironically, our anti-Oedipus. I'm going to be honest. It might be our anti-Oedipus. Anti-Eddie Ping, and it's going to be so good if it is. I freaking love AIM. Okay. So thank you all, and I bid you, adieu, as they say. See you.